Fabulous. There we go. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to introduce our topic for this afternoon. We're going to be talking about a MSP's journey to operational maturity. I am joined by Rex Frank of C-Level Operations, and we're going to throw up a poll to kind of get a feel for the room and who's here. And two quick questions for everybody. What hats do you wear in the organization? You can pick you can pick multiple hats in there. And then the second question is really how large is your firm, just to kind of get an idea, because as we'll mention a little bit down the road here, some of these both KPIs and some of these hurdles that you hit, they hit a little different depending on what role you have in the organization and obviously how big the organization is.
It's interesting. It seemed like the owners were the first to vote because the owner line was really big, and then the service exec line kind of took it over.
Well, all the service executives were taking care of all the fires from overnight at the beginning of the day.
They're still working tickets, right? Yeah.
So now they've freed up enough of their time that they can come talk to people like us. So that's good. That's awesome.
Yeah, here's basically the results. We got about 28% owners, 8% finance, 12% sales and marketing, 56% in service execs, 32% in dispatchers, and 32% on engineers. So, and then about a little bit in the 1 to 10, about 30% each in the 11 to 20 and 21 to 35, and about 20% of you guys are 51 plus. So perfect.
That's fabulous. And that's a pretty good distribution and pretty common for the industry, for our little community that we have out there. So I just give you a brief introduction about myself, and as I mentioned, I'm co-hosting today with Rex. I'm Chris Schalleur. I wear two hats. I'm CEO of Cristo IT. We're a 17-person MSP shop just north of Philadelphia. We've been running it for 21 years now, and talk about some of the bumps and bruises I've gained over it. And I'm also a partner in Nilear, which is a scorecarding system really geared around visibility for ConnectWise MSPs out there. Went to Villanova University. I was a chemical engineer, which is a really long story of how I got from point A to point B and running a computer company. And I live just outside of Philadelphia with my wife, Jen, and my two daughters, Julie and Emily. And there's my email if you ever want to reach out to me about anything in particular. Happy to have a conversation. So really, and it's pronounced Nilear is clear. I think we were talking about that earlier, Rex.
Nilear is clear. There's a million ways to say your name. I hear Nilear, Nilear.
Nilear.
Where'd that name come from?
It was a Friday afternoon. There was alcohol involved, and we literally were plugging in 6 characters into the domain search to see whether or not anything was available, and we came up with Nilear, and it looked like a word. I wish I had a better story than that.
I think that's a great story. It's like the only 6-letter domain that was left that actually looked like a word.
Yep, and here we are almost 12 years later, and it's stuck. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I was looking at or talking to Brad Benner about Time Zest, and it was kind of almost exactly the same story, right? It was all about a domain name that they could find that they liked, that sort of had some meaning for them. So
few and far between sometimes.
All right. So the other guy on here is myself, Rex Frank, founder and CEO of C-Level Operations. My career started in 1988 as a tech. A friend of mine, my uncle actually, suggested I go talk to this guy named Oli, and I knew I wanted to be in the computer field, and I went over to talk to him, and I swear, Chris, I did not even understand at the time I was on an interview, right? And next thing I know, this guy's offering me a job, and I was like, what? And I left $9 an hour I was 18 years old at Alpha Beta grocery store, working in the produce department for $5 an hour to go to work for Oli, right? And I mean, everybody in my family thought I was completely nuts, and I was like, no, but this is the field I want to be in. So probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my career was to take a half a pay cut to do that. But I had a great ride there. Got promoted to the service manager role in the early 90s, and in 2004 became part of a service executives peer group. Oli was part of an owners peer group, and they were trying to figure out. We were all trying to figure out this managed services thing, and the owners were meeting and trying to figure it out, but they all had to go back to their offices and try to make progress working through their service managers. And they were having varying degrees of success doing that. And that's why they came up with the idea, well, heck, let's get our service managers together and have them come to the same conclusions we're coming to. And then they're more invested in going back and making it work. And man, it just changed my career, being held accountable by my peers to very specific financial metrics and sharing best practice and helping each other set strategic goals that we would go back and translate to tactical goals for our team. And it really just changed me. I then worked at a 50-person company for a year and a half. I was charged with creating a managed services program in there, and then did it again. A lot of you may know Jameson West. I was his director of operations for a year, and rode with him from the $1 to $2 million mark. And then I founded Sea Level. And I tell you, I probably was a little bit cocky about thinking I knew a lot about operations in 2010. And one thing I've really learned is just how much I learned from working with you guys, the IT community. I probably, if I look at what I knew then, which I thought was a lot, it's probably 10% of what we've learned from you guys and working with you, which has just been an amazing ride. And Sea Level's just grown, and we've just created this collection of IT operational best practice, and create a rhythm around holding people accountable to working on their businesses every week. And it's been a lot of fun. So to follow your intro, I live just outside of Seattle in a town called Bonnie Lake. And what's interesting about Bonnie Lake is I was talking to Paul Dipple, and when he was working in Seattle, he lived in Bonnie Lake, and I was like, what? But together, my wife and I have 7 kids ranging from 13 years old to 30, and what is it? 4 grandkids ranging from 2 to 10. So it's interesting.
That's its own journey right there.
Yes.
That's fabulous. So Rex, you're going to kick it off and talk about that journey and the stages that we reach, and then I'll follow up after you with a little bit more about the KPIs and how they change throughout those various stages of the journey. And I'll move over to talking about your journey there.
That picture was starting to bother me, but okay. So we've got this entrepreneurial journey, and I learned about this probably maybe close to 5 years ago from the ConnectWise IT Nation Involved community. It was called HTG back then. And they started defining out these 4 operational maturity stages that companies go through. And the first one is muscle and feel. That's when it's primarily run by the owner. And we're going to talk more about each of these in a second. But the second is managing to what good looks like, which is, the typical setup would be either 2 owners, one doing sales and one doing service, or an owner and a service manager. And then the third stage is what they call building teams and strategy. And that's when the company really starts building more of a leadership team. And then the fourth one is what they call leading toward legacy. And the owner is really focused on legacy planning. So let's dive into muscle and feel here. So again, muscle and feel, we call it muscle and feel. It's because when the owner is doing all of the heavy lifting, right? Everybody reports to the owner. The owner's making all the business decisions. They're guiding and controlling kind of everything about the business. And one thing that we find is that they're very close to the clients. They're very close to the issues and the tickets, and the need for KPIs in the business is actually pretty low, right? They just have a connection to everything that they need to know so that they can make business decisions. We tend to find that there's 2 management extremes. The first one would be dump and run, right? That sounds a lot like the owner is so busy that they just don't have time to figure this thing out, and they just dump it on that service manager or somebody else in the company and say, "You figure this out. I don't have time." And what usually happens is they do their best to figure it out, and it doesn't match what the owner had in their mind, and so expectations are missed, and then everybody's frustrated with each other. And then of course there's the other extreme where the owner's so connected that they have a lot of fear to let go of anything, so they say, "I need you to do this," but then they're like, "Oh, you're not doing that right, and let me show you," and just constantly over their shoulder kind of doing it for them the whole time. And nobody likes to work in that environment either, right? So it's tough to get past that. uh, the wrong KPIs, and I'm not sure wrong KPIs is actually the right word, but uh, the owner's challenge is they got these gut feelings that are very good instincts, and their challenge is to convert that into what actually could I measure, right? And um, a symptom that we find when somebody's in the managing or muscle and feel strategy here is that there's an engineer that tends to rise to the top, right? They seem to be the best with the clients. They seem to be able to fix anything. And typically it's the one that is willing to work whatever hours or whatever day. And there's a tendency to say, well, that's my best person. I should make them the service manager, right? And so we
Mm.
do that, and I find that because the owners don't, they have sort of an unconscious incompetence. They're not aware that they don't even know how to coach a manager. That they just go along with this person as their manager for 2 or 3 years, and they just find that all they've done is make their best person less billable, without any real impact on taking a load off of the owner. Um, but there's a lot of control issues, right? Owners that because of uneasiness and that uneasy feeling in their gut, they don't want to let go of things. And if you look at the business from a valuation perspective, the value is very highly tied to the muscle, right? AKA the owner. If I was going to go acquire a muscle and feel business, it would be very important that that owner stayed to run that business. Otherwise, employees and clients would jump ship. So, what do you think,
I
Chris?
I found myself to be bipolar, depending on the day, going back and forth between the dump and run, and then once that didn't work for a couple times in a row, then really get into the nitty gritty and over micromanage everything. I mean, I found that to be a really healthy environment for my team.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and one of the keys is when the company's in this stage, they don't have really any KPIs, and it's arguable that they don't need them because the owner's gut is close enough and connected to everything that it's probably pretty accurate, right? Um,
Not communicable though.
right. So let's take a look at managing to what good looks like. So in here, the owner discovers that the service manager can actually do some things well, and in many cases might actually do them different, but also better than the way the owner would have done it themselves. And that kind of brings the owner's anxiety level down a little bit. And then they start hearing things like Gary Pica out in the industry talking about all-in seat price or tickets per endpoint or that kind of, those kind of metrics. And they hear Paul Dipple out there talking about best in class EBITDA and gross margin on managed services and the metrics that he tracks from a financial perspective in his benchmarking index. And they start saying, well, gosh, I wonder how we compare to that, right? And that's where the name managing to what good looks like comes from. But it doesn't take long before they try to run some reports. There's a lot of built-in reports in the PSA and stuff, and they try to run them, and they quickly realize that the data that they have, the results of these reports don't make any sense. And then they go like, why don't they make any sense? And they're like, oh, because our data is crap. And then so they do some work, they go start trying to figure out why the data is crap, and they realize it's because they have no standardized process, right? And they also probably have engineers that just do a lot of cowboy tactics going on, where engineers are doing whatever they want to do. So they go to work, and that's an early sign that they have progressed to managing to what good looks like. And so they go to work on teaching process, creating process and procedure, and rolling it out, and teaching their engineers, and trying to hold them accountable. And I have found that this is probably at least minimum a 2-year journey to get through managing to what good looks like working with your team. And you're working on process, procedure, you're getting better data, your KPIs are starting to make more sense. But there's still a lot of signs that we know you're still in this phase, right? Like lack of a meeting rhythm. I'll ask the service executive, how often do you meet with your owner? And it's the answer somewhere between once a month and twice a year, right? And I say, well, gosh, how often do you get together with your techs? Do you have your weekly meeting? And they're like, no, we're supposed to have one once a month, but it gets canceled more often than we actually have it, right? That's a sign you're early in managing to what good looks like, is that you even have them on the calendar, but they get canceled most of the time. But the more you leverage these meetings and focus on processes and systems, and more consistent your meeting rhythms become, a sign you're approaching the end of managing what good looks like is, it's not okay to miss the Tuesday morning meeting that we have all the staff together, and the Thursday afternoon meeting between the service manager and the owner, right? That's like, because you guys are getting stuff done during those meetings, that those rhythms and the standardized agendas are in place. That's how we know you're approaching the end of managing what good looks like. Um, is that
And really one of the toughest cultural changes as well during the journey is getting through this section of it, because it really is different than the muscle.
yeah. And it's interesting, the KPIs are different, and we're going to go dive into that differently, but what the owners are measuring in the business is different than the first stage and the next two stages.
Yep.
So let's take a look at that.
Mm-hmm.
So our third stage is building teams and strategy. So in stage one, the org chart was pretty flat, right? We got an owner and up to about 7 or 8 employees. And then in the second stage, it gets a little bit bigger. I see them getting up closer to 15 or 16 employees. There's a thing called the rule of 7, where no manager should have more than 7 direct reports. You can push it to 10 or 11, but at 10 or 11, that manager is really not doing a good job with managing the individual people, and staying close to them on their one-on-one meetings, and setting technical goals and helping them achieve their goals. So we move into building teams and strategy, and now the leadership team is getting bigger. There's usually sales representation, there's admin and finance representation, there's the owner representation, and now there's service representation. And as we progress through building teams and strategy, it starts with just a service manager, but then it becomes somebody a service director, and somebody running professional services projects, and somebody running managed services. And then as they continue to grow and the rule of 7 becomes a problem inside the managed services practice, we start to see team leaders. There might be a help desk lead, and then usually there might be a knock lead. And as they start approaching 35-ish or 40 employees, we start having that discussion with our clients, where our clients are saying, man, you guys are getting kind of big. Every time I call, it's a different person helping us, and they don't know us very well. And that's when you start saying, you're creating the pod concept, right? Where we got the red team that supports this group of clients, and the blue team that supports that group of clients. And each of those two teams has a leader, right? So that your leadership team is growing. And the interesting thing is as your leadership team builds, they get one more level removed from the day-to-day client interactions and all of the individual tickets, and their gut feel, their gut connection gets more and more disconnected from what's happening in the business, and your dependence on the KPIs just increases and increases and increases as the company grows. And that means your dependence on the data being accurate increases. And what happens in this stage, right, as you're building out this team, is you find a lot of disconnect in the leadership team. You find accountability problems. You find a bunch of individual visions being developed. And that becomes the leadership team's responsibility to create culture in the company, right? Which is mission, vision, core values, alignment with those core values, individual alignment with the mission and vision. And that's why we start seeing EOS, the Entrepreneur's Operating System, the book Traction. It starts to become very heavily, like you become dependent on EOS to create that alignment and accountability in your leadership team. And that, but and you're not going to grow and scale until you get that stuff figured out, right? There's gazelles, there's Stratop, there's a lot of different business operating systems like EOS. Uh, and a failing of
Yep.
the owner, right, in this stage is to keep the vision large enough to keep the leaders challenged and engaged and aligned, right? That's a failure early in building teams and strategy, and you're not going to progress past it unless you get that figured out. And another sign that you're at the end of building teams and strategy is that the owner's feeling lost, right? It's like I've spent, you know, this much time taking hats off of me and putting them on somebody else in the organization, that now I come to work, I'm not even sure what I'm supposed to do. And that's the habu, right? What becomes the highest and best use of your time? And that's a sure sign that you're at the end of building teams and strategies, when that owner's not sure what to do. Any thoughts,
Yep.
Chris?
My, I struggled with this, and you mentioned it on the previous slide. The best person in that role is not necessarily the best leader for that role or that team. And struggling the difference between the best person is the best person to lead is not necessarily the most adept engineer or the most adept salesperson, and separating those two things from a great leader of the team from the best person to do the job was really a big struggle for me.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And by the way, we are monitoring the chat and the Q&A. Tyler says that he meets daily with the owner. You know, the more, the better. I had a session at IT Nation Connect. If you're registered, you might look for it. It's all about creating alignment between the owner and the service executive. The Evolve community published a workbook that I worked with them to create on what the meeting rhythms and what to do in those meetings. So it's a pretty good session if you're interested in taking a look. And so the fourth one is leading toward legacy, right? And when we're in here, the owners tend to define success as growth, or we got this many new clients, or we broke into this new field or something like that. And that's kind of their definition of success. But we find that owners, once they're in this stage, they're more worried about what's the significance, what kind of impact are we having on our clients and on the industry. It's a little bit different way of thinking about the business. It's a good sign that you're in this stage. The business should be running pretty well. The leadership team should be able to run and control the business without too much involvement of the owner. And the owners are really coming to the realization that we're all going to exit, you know, whether we want to or not, right? And that's what the legacy planning is all about, and figuring out transition strategies for your company. You know, how do people retire? How do you know, does the business get sold, or does the owners? I have a couple of clients where their whole plan is that the employees become the owners of the company in this stage. And you know, it's whatever your legacy plan is what we want to make sure that we're executing on. But you know, that I think it was Yogi Berra that says, if you don't know where you're going, you might not get there, right? So um,
Yep. Yep.
and
Yep.
the owner really spends their time focusing on sharing wisdom. So what I did is I kind of grabbed our second section of the C-level operational processes here. I've got a chart where I've listed out all 87 operational functions that we have, that we coach on, and then across the top is how we coach it differently depending on whether you're muscle and field, managing to what good looks like, building teams and strategy, or leading toward legacy. So like, you know, if I look at triage right here, I've got owner knows everything about every ticket, right? That's how triage works. And in managing to what good looks like, we now have the service manager knows everything about every ticket, and the owner's brought in the loop when there's important tickets, but we have a dispatcher managing every ticket. And as you get to teams and strategy, like the owner's like, ticket what? How do I log in to ConnectWise? I'm not even sure, right? And but the service manager is now following just the important tickets, and we're relying on the dispatchers to and team leaders to know most things about what's going on. And you can see the over and leading toward legacy, that service director usually isn't even thinking about tickets. They're more worried about strategy and culture, and supporting the sales department tends to happen over there. So look at time entry. I'll get to this dispatch one in a second. Look at time
Mm-hmm.
entry, right? in muscle and feel, it's totally haphazard, right? It's like, yeah, sometimes we do it, sometimes we don't. Um, and when we get to managing to what good looks like, we're trying to get people, right? We're trying to build process and procedure, and we're trying to get people to enter their time real time as they work on their tickets. But late time entry is allowed, late timesheet submittal still allowed, but there's a sense of frustration when they're not doing it. And then as we get over to teams and strategy, it starts to change from, hey, get your time in before the end of the week to, hey, get your time in before the end of the day. But the timesheets are due on the 30th and they better be turned in on the 30th, right? We got to get that. But by the time you get to leading toward legacy, nothing short of immediate time entry is acceptable in any way. So let's take a look at dispatch management, right? So in um, muscle and feel, I would actually argue that self-dispatch is probably the best way to do it. Um, it's the most efficient. Everybody's close enough to each other that you can just have an awareness. Everybody can have an awareness of every ticket, right? There's not enough for it to be a problem, and it's probably the best. I sometimes use an analogy of my local airport. I've got Auburn Regional Airport is very, very close to my house, and there's no control tower there, right? They self-dispatch. They get on a radio frequency and they say, "Hey, I'm 3 miles away. I'll go first." And the other guy goes, "Oh, I'm 5 miles away. Okay, I'll go second." They literally self-dispatch to use the runway. But you go a few miles away at SeaTac International Airport, and there's an air traffic controller who tells every pilot in the area, this, I need you at this altitude, this speed, turn left, turn right. And they know all the planes in the air and they're guiding them in so that they can get the most efficient use of that runway. And the interesting thing there is it has nothing to do with the skill of the pilot. If they're in that airspace, the most seasoned veteran pilot is still taking the same direction that the brand new pilot in his Cessna is taking to land at that airport. So, so as we move in managing to what good looks like, we're introducing centralized dispatch at this stage. And I want to call out this thing I have in here called tolerate rogue engineers. And this might be a little bit shocking, but I actually advocate that when you're in this stage, the right answer is to tolerate the engineers that you're struggling to get to follow your processes and procedures. That's because the business has a dependence on these individuals. And we make a lot of excuses, but they're kind of valid, right? The clients love them. They can fix anything. They work all hours of any day. And ultimately, the business is dependent on them. And I think the right answer is to tolerate them and try to teach and coach and teach and coach. But as we move to building teams and strategy, remember our dependence on that, on those KPIs increase. And we got leaders trying to make decisions, and we're 1 or 2 steps removed from all the individual client interactions and tickets, and they need these KPIs to make decisions. And that engineer is messing them up. And they say things like, they just cause too much havoc in the business. We can't have them stay. And they say things like they cause morale problems with everybody else that is following our processes and procedures. So what I find interesting is when you're over here, I believe the right answer is to release that engineer to go work for firms that are muscle and feel or managing to what good looks like firms. And they'll be much happier over there, and we'll be much happier without them. And hopefully, as part of that growth and transition, we've buffered more engineers around them, that we have less and less dependence on that person who just won't get in line. And finally, in leading toward legacy, right, we're fully engaged in centralized dispatch. We've introduced project managers. We've got team dispatch probably going on in those teams and pods. And something can happen now, right? We can say things like, okay, we have 80 hours of open tickets in budgets. I've got 8 engineers, so I've got 10 days worth of backlog. And you can never run that report when you're in muscle and feel. We just don't have any data. Managing to what good looks like, the data is so sparse that it doesn't really exist. You can't rely on the report, but by teams and strategy, it's starting to make sense. But by the time you're on leading toward legacy, you can really count on it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And some of these are obviously more painful as you go, because you have that rogue engineer that maybe got you where you needed to go. It got you where you are today, and and now it's just like you said, it's too painful to continue. You can't have that cancer going on anymore.
So, and I tell you, it frustrates me when I'm on one of the Facebook owners groups and somebody complains about an engineer that won't enter time, right? And it seems like everybody jumps on the fire 'em bandwagon, right? And I always look at it like that's probably not the right answer, right? Our industry as a whole is mostly somewhere between managing to what good looks like and building teams and strategy. And I kind of feel like they might be giving bad advice to a company that's muscle and feel or managing to what good looks like. I don't think that you should be firing that engineer at that point. And the other interesting thing is I think most of them giving that advice are the same ones that have that rogue engineer that won't fire them because they can't. But they know the right answer is over there someplace, but they're not even there yet themselves. Sometimes
It's
I think they
a
might,
lot of stones and glass houses being thrown around in our
yeah.
industry. Yes.
Sometimes I think they're saying fire them so they can find them and hire them actually, but
Absolutely, it's a win-win for everybody.
and,
um,
and guys, we're trying to keep an eye on the Q&A and the chat. Either I'm totally boring you and this is uninteresting, or you just haven't found the chat button yet. But we are watching for it.
Jump in with any questions, and we are. I think we are recording it, and we do have the slide deck available for everybody after we're done. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about KPIs and going through that journey now. There's different parts of your MSP that are at different stages, and that's okay. So this is not a fixed. This is not where you forklift everybody in your organization and you move from what good likes over to legacy. It's not where you're moving everybody from muscle over to what good looks like. It's different pieces and different members on the team are going to be at different stages. You have to be okay with the service team progressing at a different rate than the project team or maybe the sales team, and that's okay. You're not going to be able to focus on everything at once. It's good to be consistent about that, but you're not going to be able to get that all moving at the same time. And it's not one way. Really, speaking from the heart, some of the most frustrating moments for us were that one step. You take 2 steps forward and you take 1 step back, or sometimes you take 2 steps forward in the service arena and you take 1 step back in the project arena. And those step backs really hurt when you see all of this progress and, hey, we're really getting things going in this particular section of the business, and then unfortunately you get hit between the eyes in another section, and that frustration is really across all MSPs. I think everybody has experienced this at various degrees. When you're in those level 2 companies, when you're building that foundation and you're getting people to start putting tickets in progress, because we started to say, okay, we've recognized the fact that we are now doing different things, and SLA is really what we get measured by. It's one of the things that we put in front of the clients. It's one of the things that we can actually tell our team, and this is what having this good data is paramount. We start making time to enter time. So I don't care how good of an engineer you are. As soon as you pick up that phone for the next phone call, or you turn your head away from the screen and go grab a cup of coffee or whatever, you just lost a very good percentage of what you just did. And it goes down exponentially over time. So trying to recall, what you did that day from sticky notes all over your desk and putting all your time in at 4:45 in the evening, if you're lucky, let alone the next morning when you're getting your coffee, something's going to get lost. A ball's going to get dropped. Whatever plates that you're spinning, you're going to lose some of those plates. You start looking at completing and closing those tickets. The engineers are really great about, well, there's just one more thing that I have to tweak, or I want to take a look at one more thing and everything like that. And you get engineering to understand that done is better than perfect. And then we start developing a culture around closing that out and moving on. 8 hours entered. Rex, I know you have a great story about this with the computers.
Oh, thanks for reminding me.
Yep.
So one of the things I learned early in my career, especially before we were doing managed services and we were selling hours, right, is this great little story that you talk to your engineers about it, and you're kind of trapping them. But you say, hey, let's say we're in the business of selling computers, and every day I buy 8 computers and I stick them in the corner in the warehouse. And then we go through the day and we sell some of them and we use some of them, but whatever's left at the end of the day, we just take them up, we pick them up, we carry them outside, and we throw them in the dumpster, because tomorrow morning 8 new computers are going to show up, and we're going to do the same thing again, right? We're going to sell some of those, and whatever's left over, we're just going to throw them in the dumpster. And they just look at you like you're completely insane, right? Like, why wouldn't you just keep them on the shelf and sell them tomorrow, right? So, and then we say, well, would you feel secure working for a business? Like, do you think you have a stable paycheck if they just threw half their inventory away every day? And they always say no. And so then we say, so you think we should have some way to keep track of who we sold those to and make sure they get billed to whoever we sold them to? And they're like, yeah, we should. I was like, great. Yeah. I buy 8 hours from you every day, right? And if we don't sell them to a client, then we throw them in the dumpster, because time is an inventory item with no shelf life. They expire in the moment. And guess what? We do have a way to keep track of that. It's called Autotask or ConnectWise or whatever our PSA is. And that's where we keep track of our time to make sure that the hours that I buy from you are getting sold to a client, right? And it gets extended into the managed services world, through measuring agreement profitability and that kind of stuff. There's a whole host of reasons why it's super important to be entering your time against your flat fee agreements, because that's how you know if they're profitable or not, and if you have to make adjustments or changes in the way you service it or whatever over time.
Yeah, and once you have that visibility around that time, that's when the MSPs start recognizing, you know what, we have to get as much of that time customer facing as possible. That's our value, that's our product. We have to get that. So you start evaluating how much of that pie, what's the slice of the pie piece that is customer facing, and you start looking at that utilization number.
Well, if we can go back one slide real quick.
Sure. Yeah.
So keep in mind that these are sort of the KPIs that are really important to managing to what good looks like clients of ours, right? These are the ones where they're realizing, wow, we need data, we need standardized process so we can get accurate data so we can measure our KPIs. And one thing I like to talk about here is bonus plans for engineers tend to be based around compliance with our new processes. If you can get your 8 hours entered, I've got a kicker for you. If you can change your tickets from scheduled to in progress or working issue now in the C-level world, if you can do that consistently, I've got a small kicker for you, right? And we're trying to incent a change in behavior, which is compliance with our processes. So that's where the bonus plans tend to be focused when we're in managing to what good looks like companies.
Yep. And then as you move into that, further along in that what good looks like, you start evaluating things as like closing percentage. We know that tickets are being handled the right way because we now have data in the system. So now we know what a good ticket looks like. Now we know what this, we now know that a one-touch close where the customer calls in, gets their issue handled, and walks away, and the engineer fixes everything in the first time and walks away, and it's a win-win. That's the best scenario for everybody. Obviously, not having anything go wrong to begin with is the best, but if something does go wrong, that's the most efficient. So you start trying to get to that closing percentage because that's the most efficient use of that inventory of time. It's not callbacks, and it's not back and forth, and it's the least frustration for our clients. Timesheet accuracy. So you now show your work, and this is a tough one. I know culturally this is a tough one, but you have engineers, which are typically not the most verbose of industries, and you have them now starting to write their notes for other people to digest. You're now just not writing notes that I did this and I did this and I did this. You're now writing to somebody else so that they're able to digest what you did, and you're writing like somebody else is going to read this. You have you're attaching configurations. Now, if we have the time going in, we're now getting that data coming into the system, and we now have we now have where is that going in to the client? What things are causing those black holes of time to use all of that inventory? So this is now more client facing. So this is where you now start getting VCIOs or account management into the system, where they're evaluating how can we use less of our inventory against this client, as you mentioned, Rex, where we're going into that managed services, and that's where the type subtype item you get that. And something that ConnectWise introduced is that in the report writer, that starburst mechanism in the reporting, where you can actually visibly see where are the large chunks of time going. And then you're utilizing templates where you say, okay, you have a good idea of where those categories, where those sunk labor hours are going. Where can we get better? Let's start putting some automation. Let's start putting some templates around the most amount of time that's getting sunk, so that you can start allocating more resources to getting better and hopefully shrinking some of that time to what you're using. And you get those particular incidents get way less time suck, and maybe hopefully with some automation, you have less of those incidents even happening to begin with.
So, Chris, I'm going to be a bad lawyer and ask you a question I don't know the answer to. So,
okay.
Because I just thought about this a minute ago. So, we're looking at this, and we said the level 2 companies, right? The managing what good look like companies, that most of the KPIs are around measuring compliance with these processes we're trying to put in place, so we can get better data to have KPIs, right? And then, and there's a whole set of tools in the Nilear tool set, family of tools that you probably get very good adoption in your client base of, right? And then as we move to the level 3 companies, the building teams and strategy companies, the KPIs that they want to measure are very different, right? And then, but they require you to be good at the other ones before you can use these. Okay. So here's the question that I don't know the answer to. As people are leveraging the Nilear tool set, you probably have more of the level 2 companies as clients than you have level 3s, but those level 2 companies are trying to use these more advanced tools that require better data for them to make sense. Do you find level 2 companies are frustrated trying to use these KPI, these tools that you have around these KPIs? Because they're like, are they not finding the right value in the Nilear stack because they're lacking the processes to have the data to find the value?
No, that's a great question. I'll go with the bad lawyer question, but it's twofold. It goes to that change of culture, which is really probably one of the hardest things to gauge as far as changing that within your own internal team. But it's also it's the hardest thing to move. Like, hey, listen, this is now important, just as important as it is to fix the client's problem, is that it's important to keep track of this inventory of time, and having that visibility around that, so that you can actually see live what everybody's time is going against, especially in this world that we're living in now, Rex, where everybody's working disparately, and sometimes you're in a hybrid or working from home, and where is all that time going? Having that visibility, but it's also the most rewarding. So it's also we tell people after 30, 60 days of using us, you're going to see this actually move really, really fast, you're going to see the most dramatic improvements from making these base level changes in your organization. That's where you're going to start to really, really get that benefit out of things.
So I just want to throw two quick color pieces in on this slide before we move on.
Sure.
One is the attaching configurations. That helps us with the incident management and problem management, right? Incident management is rapid restoration of services, and problem management is root cause analysis of multiple related incidents, right? And permanent fixes. So I say incidents is, hey, there's a paper jam on a printer, and we fix it and we close the ticket. And then a week later, there's another paper jam on the same printer, and we fix it and close the ticket. And a week later, there's another paper jam on the same printer, right? When we're smaller, there's a tribal awareness that, hey, this is the third time we've had a paper jam on that printer. Maybe it needs a new feed roller. Let's go figure out why we keep getting tickets on this, right? And that's when it becomes problem management. Let's fix it permanently. And when in muscle and feel, and even managing to what good looks like, there's an awareness that this is happening. But as the company gets bigger and the more and more different people are working on tickets, the less tribal awareness there is. And we need things like the configuration items attached so that we can use like ConnectWise automation workflows that says, hey, there's 3 tickets on the same device inside of 30 days. It can auto create a problem management ticket for you. And the further leadership is removed from the day-to-day stuff, the more we need to leverage that data by attaching a config item to every ticket so that we can have more advanced automation and workflows. Kind of same thing with the type, subtype, and item.
Yeah, and you have people that who are working remotely now, where you don't have that tribal knowledge from yelling over the cube walls of what you do with firewall XYZ last week, and so you don't have that. So those that are in that level 2, maybe cresting into the level 3, are now instantly thrust into a level 4 and 5 world where you don't have that, because you can chat through Teams and maybe you can call each other on the phone, but you don't have that tribal knowledge going on all around you in a within the 4 walls type of environment.
So yeah, as we move on to the next slide, I guess I want to make a comment. I totally agree with your assessment that this whole work from anywhere environment is forcing companies to increase their maturity levels and leverage their processes more.
Or have a lot of pain trying. Yes. So as you start muscle,
we got about 10 minutes. My question took us off track a little bit. So.
No, that's okay. So we'll as you get now into that legacy mode, you're now watching SLA. So you're now very, very acutely aware that SLA is run like a chess clock. So you have the 2 old guys playing chess in the park. The clock is running on one side or the other. Your client's expectation, and when the clock is running on their time, and when the ball is in your court and the clock is running there. You now have your way of doing things. You now, because you've done that time analysis, you now know that those black holes of information, I'll spoil the surprise of those going through this journey, some of the biggest holes of time on that inventory is when things don't match up, when you don't have that standardization within it, and you now recognize you're now going to try and get all of your clients as cookie cutter as possible. And you now have, you're not okay with, oh, John knows how to do that setup and so forth and so on. You get into that, and configuration station and Nilear actually scorecards on how well you're doing that standardization. Project analysis, you have projects are no longer rogue. You have the project management, the setup of the management of the project is not lost time. It's not frivolous. It's time that's paid for by the client, and they know that there's value given to it. Communication templates, when you're analyzing the time afterwards, so that you can look at budgeted time versus actual time. You can look at milestone dates and how well you managed to that project. that now becomes a focus for you. And then you have time by board. So you have what roles are actually seeing the time, because you need to know where resource-wise, do we need more level 1s? Do we need more level 3s? Do we need more security guys? You're now able to, you're now moving into that tiered or pod system, as you mentioned, Rex, and efficiencies are around the MSP's growth in certain specific needs, depending on their client base. And that may not all be exactly the same depending on what MSP you are and what client base that you're serving. But there's now more paths forward for people within your own company to advance, that you're now building out that structure. You mentioned the MSP org chart being flat. This is now starting to get into the complexity of things. And now you have time by company. We call them vampires here, but sometimes you have certain clients that over monopolize a particular tech. They fall in love with Joe, and they always get Joe when they call in. You want to start keeping an eye on this, because you have the balance between a Joe's account type, and you have no backup as an MSP, which is a dangerous game to play, all the way to the other side where you have a revolving door. And you mentioned the client that says, well, you're too big for us, or I get, every time I call, I get a different guy working on my account. Well, having that visibility in your KPIs of how many people are actually spending time and how much time are they spending on this particular client is a real good way of having that visibility around that.
If we go back a slide real quick, there's two quick thoughts here. Number one, four. Let's talk about SLA real quick. In the muscle and feel companies, SLA probably isn't even configured correctly in the PSA. Nobody cares. The owner's got a gut feel that, hey, these are taking too long or not, right? And then in the building or managing to what good looks like, they get configured generally correctly, but the data is still pretty messy because we're still having problems getting engineers to change the status of the tickets while they're working on them. And by the time we're in the building teams and strategy, the SLA data is actually pretty good, and we're using it internally. And we share it with clients occasionally. We have enough confidence in it to share it with a client if there's really a reason to. But I'll tell you, the leading toward legacy clients, I've seen some of them publish their SLA data, real time through a widget on their website. They're so proud of it, right? And kind of the same thing happens with, agreement analysis. Is we really can't do any agreement analysis until you're through the managing to what good looks like. Once you've got engineers entering time, we can start doing profitability and ticket analysis. And in level 4, that should just be the way you do business, is we're constantly analyzing our best performing agreements and trying to find more ways to deliver value to those clients. And we're looking at our worst performing agreements and try to figure out how to fix our efficiency problems. And we're always pushing those two toward the center so that we're delivering the right amount of service to every client. And the thing is you can't do any of these level 4 KPIs until you master the level 3 KPIs, and you can't really utilize any of the business maturity level 3 KPIs until you master the level 2 KPIs. And then the maturity
there's no shortcut on this. You have to go through the stages, because if you don't have the data in there to begin with, slicing and dicing this is you're slicing a mud pie. It's meaningless.
Yeah. So guys, we're coming up on the last couple minutes. There aren't any questions in there yet. Either you're not asking them or we've answered everything, which probably isn't likely. If you hit the next slide, I'll introduce it while we're waiting on a couple questions. But I've put together on the C-Level website, if you go to clevelops.com/key decisions, matter of fact, I should probably type that in here, but can't type and speak at the same time, apparently. If you go there, you'll download a little 3-4 page PDF that I made that talks about the career decisions that the owner makes and the corresponding decisions that the service exec needs to make. and they each progress on top of each other. And every time together as a team, they make a decision and start executing on it, the valuation of the business increases and the maturity level of the business increases.
Yep.
So I saw a question.
We do have a question about the recording for the webinar.
Yep. So we're recording this 3 times today. One early this morning for EMEA, Europe. One right now for North America, and one later tonight for the APAC, Australia community. So we'll pick the best recording, and then that'll all get emailed out tomorrow to everybody that was registered. So you want to hit your slide real quick, and then we'll continue on the Q&A.
Yep. And so if you want to dig a little deeper, you can always schedule a one-on-one with me. There's a link here, and I'll put that in the chat as well. And I'm happy to go over. Obviously, I'm a partner at Nilear, and I'm willing to go through what we have as a product. I can actually show you here. See if this pops over here. Are you able to see that now?
Yep.
Okay.
Let me hit a couple of questions real quick.
Sure,
What are the most common modern KPIs that MSPs use today? Obviously, utilized/billable is no longer close to sufficient. I totally agree. In a flat fee world, utilized is a terrible KPI. Agreement efficiency, right? I talk about there being 4 levers that control service gross margin. Engineer pay, billing rate, and utilization are the first 3 levers. Those are the ones we've all been managing. You know, if you increase pay and don't move rates or utilization, your margin goes down, right? If you increase utilization and leave pay and rates the same, margin goes up. And the thing is in engineer pay, there's a little movement. It's hard to move that lever. Billing rates, it's hard to move that lever. Utilization, you got a little bit of movement. The average MSP has about 3 hours a day of wasted time per engineer. We can push that up to about, to get about ½ hour a day. And you do that through triage and dispatch and time entry and those kind of things you work on in the business. But man, measuring agreement profitability, that 4th lever, if you can do $800 worth of work to earn $1,000 flat fee, you're basically in effect multiplying your labor rate times 1.25. And if you're doing $2,000 worth of work to earn that $1,000 flat fee, which is where most MSPs really are, you're multiplying your labor rate times 0.5. That 4th lever, if you go to work on leveraging tools and technology and standardization and the way you deliver the service, mitigating risk, that's where the margin is in managed services.
Yep. And that's the automation and the scripting and the templates and everything else that we mentioned. Yep.
Let's see, from Aaron, this is a super helpful webinar to get our clear picture of where we need to develop as an MSP. Would this be okay to show my team? Absolutely, give them the recording. I think you should, the more your team is aware of these concepts, the better they're gonna contribute to the teamwork that's gonna solve the problems.
And I think there's a huge strength, Rex, and somebody mentioned it in the previous webinar, that it's really good to know that I'm not alone. So it's not only good for the people that are attending this webinar, but it's good for your teams as well to hey, listen, we're not on this journey by ourselves. Everybody hits this. Everybody struggles with different pieces, and that's really one of the biggest strengths and the biggest takeaways that you should get from this. And lastly, we have Tyler. What's your thoughts on text to node? I'm guessing in like a pod structure.
I think the question is about number of engineers you have for compared to the number of managed workstations you have.
Oh, it's gonna. I don't want to be wishy-washy. I always found a W-2 multiplier to be a way better measurement. So the salary to the amount of service MRR revenue that you're doing is because you might have more experienced techs with bigger salaries. So this allows you to do a blended between level 1s and level 2s and so forth and so on. So I always found W-2 multiplier, and typically you want to keep it at a 2.5 to 3.0 ratio as a better mechanism of measuring that
Yeah,
how hot are we running?
I totally agree. If you got $300,000 a month in managed services revenue, you should have about $100,000 a month in labor costs.
Bingo.
And if that's out of whack, right? If you're at a 2.0, then you have an efficiency problem. If you're at a 3.0 and you're feeling like you're running hot, then yes, hire somebody. If you're at a 2.0, no, do not hire somebody. You've got an efficiency problem. They're not leveraging tools, technology, standardization. You're not doing root cause analysis and doing permanent removal of error. Uh, that needs to be fixed first. So
Bingo. Bingo. Yeah, and that's been something that we've utilized for years now, and we know we can feel when we're running hot, and we can feel when we're running cold, and it's a great mechanism to measure that.
So in these last couple of minutes before everybody tunes out, do you want to show us what you have up here?
Sure. So this is a time machine. So really, visibility is one of the key functions here. So we measured about the time. We talked about the time and measuring that inventory, especially when everybody's working remotely. We've really found time machine to be of the biggest benefit, and this is what I'm typically talking with a lot of our clients about, and having that visibility as to what is everybody doing, the who's on first question, getting in that level 2, in that muscle feel, and in that what good looks like feel, where not only who's currently working on what, but how long have they been working on it for. In this disparate world that we're living in, where you don't have that yelling over the cube wall functionality or visibility, this has really been key for us. And then as you start graduating into that level 3, level 4 legacy, you're going to be a little bit more interested in the service chips on the left, which are, it shows the number of tickets that you've put time against, as well as the number of tickets that you've completed. So going to that one touch close, as close as you can to it. And then SLA and time entry data being the rings around the center of the tech. So it really, you start to drill into this stuff, and this starts to get into that. Now level 3s are going to be interested in, where the time's being spent, or what companies is the time being spent on. So you get an idea of who's really paying attention, and where do we need to get better on these things. So really the time machine has been, especially over the past 6 or 7 months with COVID, one of the biggest benefits that we've had for our clients, and it's part of the Nilear suite.
Yeah.
Questions?
Yeah.
We got an outsourcing question here.
Yeah, there's one more from Paul. Feel free to drop off. I know we're a couple minutes over, but so Paul Zimmerman was asking, if we're outsourcing some of our help desk or NOC services, how do we best incorporate those third-party costs with KPIs? And that's a good question. Service leadership is actually working on figuring that out in their benchmark right now. They've actually added 2 fields for where you're leveraging a master MSP. And they want you to put your master MSP costs in there, so that we can start gathering that data. Right now, it's sort of an unanswered question. Most people so far in the service leadership benchmarking have been putting, like if they're using Continuum or IT by Design or something, they're putting it in either hard costs or the 1099 subcontractor costs. What we should be seeing, though, is that spend on your third-party outsourcing should be reducing your your percentage of direct labor, right? And then as long as your percentage of direct labor is moving down, if that cost is moving up and gross margin is also moving up, then we're correctly leveraging that outsourced service. So
yep. And that fourth lever you're talking about with the agreement profitability, that's absolutely one of the key KPIs that you should be looking at.
Paul, did that help?
Hopefully so. Awesome. Well, I appreciate the extra couple of minutes that people stayed on for. I wanted to be as respectful of our time that as possible. But Rex, this was fabulous. I really thought we were pretty spot on this one. If anybody has any questions, obviously have reach out to either of us, and we'll get this recording up there and get the slide deck available for everybody so that they can share out with their teams. And again, you get to a recommendation or a realization that you're not on this journey by yourself.
Yep, and it'll be tomorrow by the time we get the recording format and ready to send out. So sounds good,
Yep.
guys.
Awesome. Thank you
Okay.
for joining us, and we'll talk to everybody soon.
Okay, bye.